we are so hesitant about peeling back the layers of the onion. Like, busyness is a form of laziness. Right? This is like in my spiritual work, that's something that comes up over and over and over and over. They're like, dude, just stay busy and you'll never have to go deep. And so this is an opportunity to build a repeatable system that forces us to go deeper than we're comfortable.
Welcome back to the 7-Figure Music School podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about getting the most out of the coming year. I think a relevant episode, and an episode that is going to cover a topic that I think falls under the category of things that we know we should be doing that we're not. And what we're going to talk about today is creating a plan, an annual plan, personally and for your business in 2022 and beyond. So this is one to bookmark because you can probably come back to this every year and it'll be highly relevant. So Nate, tell me a little bit about what you do in terms of annual planning. Tell me your initial brief thoughts on this.
Yeah, just opening thoughts. You hit it right on the head, Daniel. By the way, this is just one of my absolute favorite topics. Like, I remember we did Strengths Finder with all of our leadership team at Brooklyn Music Factory years back, and I came up, my number one strength was futurist. So any chance I get to think about the future and plan ahead, boy, does Nate Shaw love that. Anyways, however, I think you hit it right on the head when you said, we all know in our heart that this is something we should do, but then we get busy. Yeah. And then it's like February 1st, and we're like, wait, it's still on my list. I should write down my goals for the year. And we're like, we're already a month into the year. Forget it. It's too late. Right. So, Daniel, you and I are here to say today that no matter what version you do, please, we hope we inspire you to set aside the time to do some version.
Yeah. And I think what this episode's going to cover is the simplest framework I think someone could use to do, I'm going to borrow a phrase you just used, to do more than just set goals. I actually, like we typically do, want to give a process, a reason why, and make this more than just a wishful thinking of, I hope we can get that done in the coming year. I want to give something that's actually workable, practical, pragmatic, and I think I want to start out with demonstrating how important I think this is. So this is going to come out early January, around the time that most people have already given up on their goals for the year. I think it's somewhere, I think the date is like January 17th. I think that's the date by which 80% of people have already given up on their goals. I read this years ago. I know I'm not making this up, but anyway, or who have already broken their New Year's resolution. So when this comes out, it will have been about a month from when I took two entire days out of my schedule to drive down to Nashville, Tennessee from Indianapolis, about a 4.5 hour drive, to meet Nate in person, for us to spend an entire day together, a very intense day, I might add, of coming up with an annual plan for this project that we're working on right here, delivering more great podcast episodes, delivering great service to our clients, coming up with a vision for how we can improve and expand upon this project. So what in the world would possess me to clear my calendar for 2 days, and one entire working day and a little bit longer than a working day spent just thinking about the coming year? Like, why would I do that? Well, I'll tell you why I do that, and it's because experience. I look back at past years at the value that process has brought to my businesses, and the value that is created by thinking that much ahead, and the personal experience of having done this poorly at first, but then better over time, and seeing how with each subsequent version of how I do this thing, this annual planning, how it has brought things into existence that didn't exist before. So that's kind of the personal reasons why I think it's so important to do. I'm curious, Nate, what from your past has led you to see this as something is crucial for you and Brooklyn Music Factory?
Yeah, I had I'm going to come back and highlight a couple things you just said, Daniel, because you made some really important points that are resistance points for most of us around even getting started. so I'm going to circle back, there's a quote from one of my mentors that stuck with me. CEO of Keep, formerly Infusionsoft. That's the software company we use for our CRM at BMF. Anywho, he said, anytime we've missed our planning process as a company was the only time we missed our goals as a company.
Wow.
And it was just like, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but not really. And I've heard him say, he said it to me a few times, and he comes back to it over and over. And you're like, wait, hold on, what? So they set goals as a company. I don't know what their valuation is now, but it's a solid mid-sized company at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the 8 figures at this point, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe even 9, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but they're a great company. They've got a great culture. They've gone through their roller coaster ride like all of us have. Clayt does a really good job of bringing the work that they do down to a level that small business owners like you and I can really understand. And so I go back to that quote because I'm like, hold on a sec. He's saying any time that he actually took the time, back to your point, Daniel, to sit down with the team or sit down personally and set goals, the likelihood of them hitting those goals, meeting or surpassing the goals, was very, very high. However, whenever they were too busy to actually take the time and sit down and set goals, and instead they just sort of jotted down whatever came to mind, they always missed the goals. So getting back to a couple of points you just made, you're like, got in a car, drove to Nashville, 4.5 hours, booked a hotel room for 2 nights. We booked a WeWork space. We spent a solid day and a half together, right? You invested time. We invested money. You invested money. You made all these personal commitments to a process that, as you pointed out, was exhausting, was kind of messy. And when we got done, at least we came out with a one sheet of a pretty good plan. Which, by the way, we're going to circle back on. We already have a follow-up meeting where we're bringing in some of the team members. So it cannot be understated what you just said, that if you want to create a future plan for yourself that you're going to try to adhere to, it starts right now by simply saying, I'm going to make the time for myself. I'm going to make the time for my company. And this is another thing that Clayt said to me. He's like, Nate, if you do not set aside the time, nobody else will set aside the time for you. No one on your team will be like, hey, Nate, let's take 2 days and get behind in our work so we can talk about an annual plan. No one's ever going to do that, dude. To this day, nobody on the team ever is like, can't wait for our next annual planning session. When are we doing it, Nate? When are we setting aside 2 uninterrupted days? I'm always just like, we have to be mindful that if we don't make the time, nobody else will, and we will find ourselves right back here in December of 2022. Every year we're listening to this. Okay, so you asked personally, what does this do for me? Well, I'm going to start by sharing just a really personal story. Yesterday, my 18-year-old daughter, Pearl, was like, Pearl, she's back from college, and I was, I'm trying to find time to spend with her. She's a big journaler. She loves her journal. She writes in it all the time. Like, hey, Pearl, I'm doing my annual planning, my writing this week. Do you want to like sit down together and do some writing together? And she's like, sure, but will you teach me what you do for your writing process? So here's my 18-year-old daughter saying, like, she doesn't have a music school. She's just a college kid, And so you realize, like, this is a process that personally I've been going through. I pulled up my journal entry from this time last year that I'm going to share some quotes from today. But it's something that I've been doing now for, I think 6 or more years, the same process. I know how long it takes. It takes me like a solid, I'll have to set aside like 3 3-hour chunks in order to get through my writing. But the first time was last night, and I sat with Pearl and I shared her the outline I'm going to share with us today, my personal one, and she wrote it down in her journal, and I promise you, a week from now, she will have gone through and tried her own version of this. So that's pretty badass when your kids are like, Dad, what do you do for personal planning? Teach me how you do it.
Yeah.
So
why do you think it would be so helpful for someone to do this? Because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think this is something that people kind of have this vague, depending on the personality makeup of the person, they have some guilt over it. Like, oh, I know I should do that. Or if you're a little more of a rebellious type, you're supposed to do it, and you're thinking to yourself, why do I have to do that? Can't we just move forward? Or, which is probably true for the majority of people listening or watching this, you just don't feel like you have the time. And perhaps you have a recollection of a time that you considered this, or you read a book on it, or you watched a YouTube video on it, or listened to a podcast where someone said you to do it. You went through a version of it, and you came out with this document that you didn't really feel a lot of connection to, and it ended up not really changing things at all for the next year. By the way, if that sounds really specific, it's because that's exactly how I felt the first time I learned that I was supposed to do annual planning or create a plan for myself, or thought, oh, I know how to get to my goals. I was willing to try anything. I know how to get to my goals. I'll do that. I'll come out with it. And then it really changed nothing about my life. So the why I think is really strong, and it's connected to the how and the what of doing this, because it's more than just, oh, you should do it. If you're doing it right, the proof is in the change and the difference that happens as a result of doing the process. So I want to be really clear on that with people. I'm not interested in wasting people's time, certainly not my own. No, you're not interested in wasting your own time, Nate. But I think if you can really connect strongly to that why, and then come out of this, or maybe some own personal research that you do around this, and can actually come up with a process that substantively changes things for you, then it will have been worth it. And that's really what this episode's about, because I know Nate has some frameworks he wants to give. I know I have some frameworks I want to give. Simple ones, maybe not as complex as what it has evolved to for me, but even if you're running a 7-figure business, to go through some of the processes that we talk about today, or ask some of the questions that we're going to tell you to ask, you're going to come up with something that is better, a plan that is better for your business in the coming year, a plan for yourself that is better in the coming year than what you would have had you not asked these questions, and then done the practical things, the outflow, the ramifications of those questions as a result of asking them. So just thought I would throw that in there.
Yeah, so we should dive into our actual systems.
Yeah.
And
let's not waste time.
Yeah, let's dive straight in. And I think what I'll do is I'll weave in some whys as we go through the system. And I'm going to give you concrete examples of things that I wrote down a year ago that now, a year later, have actually manifested.
Okay.
Because I think.
Why don't you start, Nate?
Yeah. Okay. So I use a process that we're going to start just with personal, and then we'll get to our music school process. So what do we do at BMF? But I always start personally. And I start personally because of this quote that I'm sure everybody listening has heard before, but you do not work for your music school. You do not work for your business. Your business works for you.
Ideally.
Yes, ideally. But we have to say that over and over. If you've never heard that, write it on a sticky note now. Pause this podcast. Right? You do not work for your school. Your school works for you. Right? However, there's no way for your school to work for you if you don't have a clear view on you, right? So this is why I always lead with my own personal writing before I get into Brooklyn Music Factory's annual planning. Okay, so my process, here it is, pen and paper time. By the way, I didn't make this up. I borrowed it. I will try to find out. The dude who shared this with me was on a Medium post years ago. Can't remember. I think I got it via a Tim Ferriss podcast. Anywho, my apologies to the creator of this process. I do not have his contact right now, but let me.
And briefly, before you even jump into that, could you maybe give all the pieces of it in very brief form first, and then go back and comment on them later, as opposed to going through one at a time and kind of commenting on each one? I think people understanding all of it first is going to be really helpful to get the overall context of what's going to be asked, and then the comment I think will be helpful.
Okay, so first of all, there are 7 steps. Okay,
Love it.
there's 7 steps. The first step is, and by the way, I use a timer. I set my 25-minute Pomodoro timers, and I say, Nate, write for 25. Do not be interrupted. So the step 1, highs from the last year. What? Just list highs from last year. Anything. You just start writing. This is similar to listing accomplishments. Do not overthink it. Just start writing all of the highs from last year. For example, one of the things I wrote was we bought a kayak, and my wife and I went kayaking at 5 o'clock each evening in August. I loved it. That was a high. Okay, second, write your lows from last year. What just totally bummed you out? Next, write lessons learned. These are a little bit more challenging for people, but we'll get into exactly some examples later. So lessons learned. Number 4, what am I leaving behind this year? In other words, what parts of me or sort of habits I've seen in myself, or maybe even relationships that have been draining, what am I leaving behind in 2021? Next, what am I taking with me into the next year? These are very positive attributes, positive things that I'm really energized by. Okay, so now you're on to the last 2 steps. So highs, lows, lessons learned. What am I leaving behind? What am I taking with me? Next step is you're going to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you're going to briefly write about each category and why you gave yourself that score. So score of 1 to 10, this is going to feel really difficult for certain people. Some people do not like the idea of grading themselves in any way, shape, or form. They think it's limiting, etc. You need to battle through that resistance. Okay, give yourself a grade because you're going to go back and reference it for years to come, I promise. So, rate yourself in these 7 categories. Friendships, career. I always think of my school, Brooklyn Music Factory, and then other projects I have going on. For example, working with you, Daniel. This is a separate project that I grade myself on, right? But career. Then health, both physical and mental. Do not leave out the mental health if you're all about physical. If you're all about mental, don't leave out the physical. Grade yourself on both. Spirituality. That can mean anything you want to you, whatever it means in your own spiritual journey. If not comfortable with that, just leave it out. Intimacy is number 5, right? So you can kind of whatever that means to you in terms of your partner, etc. Philanthropy. I actually swap that out for generosity. I just say generosity rather than philanthropy because sometimes philanthropy leads me down the wrong trail. It's all about giving money to blah, 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 but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, are we giving ourselves? Are we of benefit to others? And we can do that in a myriad of ways. So philanthropy / generosity. And then the last one, which is one that I think is grossly misunderstood, is life balance. So the way I sort of explained it to Pearl, life balance was just take a look at numbers 1 through 6, friendship, career, health, spirituality, intimacy, generosity. How do those all balance? Right? So think of maybe life balance as just look at your grading to date. So again, grade yourself. For example, in 2020, I have friendship up here. I gave myself a number 7. And my first line was, man, COVID has made this one particularly hard, yet I have stayed in touch with, and I listed a whole bunch of friends. And I really made an effort, and I felt really good about it. And so a lot of my friendships thrived in 2020, and that was a higher grade than I would have given myself in 2019. I promise you, I don't have 2019 here, but I made an effort. Okay, last step. We're on to step number 7. I call this story time. This is where you imagine your life in 1 year. So it's 1 year from now. What will your life look and feel like? What will you have accomplished? I have simple things like what's my income going to have been? How many hours a week will I have worked on specific projects? Will I have improved certain areas that I scored really low in? Will some areas maintain? But basically, you just turn on the imagination creativity switch and you write a page or so imagining yourself in 1 year. The next page is imagining yourself in 3 years. This gets a little bit harder for people. And then the third page is you go big. There are no limits. You dream where you can be in 5 years. You have a great quote, Daniel, you shared in a previous podcast, which is, we grossly overestimate what we can do. What is it?
Yeah, we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what can be done in 10.
Oh, 10, dig it. Okay, so I only go out as far as 5 in my process, but still 5 to me is where I go big or go home. I write down all of the aspirational goals. So that's my process, Daniel. It's 7 steps, highs, lows, lessons learned. What am I leaving behind? What am I taking with me? Then I grade myself in 7 categories, and then I close with story time. Imagine myself in 1, 3, and 5 years.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a second.
Go.
Because of my obsession with planning and I hesitate to use this word, but personal development, because that's a very vague term and can bring up all sorts of baggage for people when they hear that. But to maybe give it a little bit more definition, I just want things to be better. And I'm willing to do what it takes, and I'm willing to hold my breath as long as it takes to get to a better place. Naval Ravikant said it really, really well. He said, all self-help just boils down to think long-term over short-term. And so for me, if I have to endure some short-term pain for a long-term payoff, I'm willing to do that. And I think that's at the crux of that quote that you just said there. Overestimating what can be done in 1 year, but underestimating what can be done in 5 or 10 or whatever the number may be. The exponential rewards are there for someone who commits to this. But to get back to my devil's advocate comment, because of this obsession with, self-development and all that, and wanting things to be better, there are tons of frameworks that I've seen. My coach gave me several. I've read a lot of books where there's lots of different frameworks that can be used. I think, I'm going to drop a name here, but I think Sam Ovens' alchemy framework that he teaches in some of his material, actually a training I don't think he even has available anymore. I think he discontinued it this past year. But I actually took that training, and he has this framework for both personal and business planning. There's just tons of them. Here's the question for you, Nate. After having just said this, I'm not trying to bait you or anything like that, but does it matter what framework we use, do you think? Do you think it matters so much the particular questions we ask ourselves? Because I have my own set of personal questions that I ask every year. They're different from yours. What do you think actually drives change in using any of these frameworks? And do you think that, it necessarily matters which one you use?
Okay, dude, I wrote down, and you said, I'm going to circle back to some whys. It doesn't matter. It just like in so many of our episodes we have planned, and so many of the episodes we've shared so far, it's thinking systems over success. We have to stop with the idea of striking gold every time we go out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm gonna summarize it in one sentence, and then please keep going. But it's systems over goals. Yes. It's systems over goals. I would rather have something in place that keeps me habitually doing something, because eventually I'm going to dig deep enough to find the gold you're talking about. But please continue.
Well, and we are so hesitant about peeling back the layers of the onion. Like, busyness is a form of laziness. Right? This is like in my spiritual work, that's something that comes up over and over and over and over. They're like, dude, just stay busy and you'll never have to go deep. And so this is an opportunity to build a repeatable system that forces us to go deeper than we're comfortable. So no, it doesn't matter, dude. I think you've shared your system with me. It's great. This is what's worked for me. The fact that I've shown up to do this I'm in my year 7, that's evidence that I should keep doing it because I've discovered a lot about myself. And lo and behold, some of the imaginations of myself where I'd be in 1 and 3 years, those things have actually manifested. Daniel, you want to share your process?
Are you talking my personal process, like for my, personal life or whatever, or are you talking for business? So if we're talking business, then there's a process that I go through, and I'm not going to go deep into this part, but I do start with a little formula for kind of envisioning what I'd like things to look like for me personally. Now, I'm not going to get into that because, like I said, Nate, I think yours is great, and I think as a starting framework, that's really good for people, and even for people who are advanced like you are, because you've been doing this for years. I think it can be helpful. But I start with personal purposefully because it is signaling to me. No, it's coming from a place of conviction that the business is to serve me, and I'm going to put family and personal health first over the business. Otherwise, just given my personality makeup, it would be very easy for that to dominate my life. And if you actually go back 7-8 years, I didn't have nearly as much self-regulation when it came to how I spent my time, business versus personal. And I would very easily let the business overrun into my personal life and kind of be in that gray zone of never really being checked out from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night. And there were no really strong boundaries. And so to enforce those boundaries, even in the way that I plan, I start with personal life first and think of my entire life, and business is one sector of it, even though it's a pretty big one for me. I love it. And the various business ventures I'm involved in are probably in 2 different categories in my life, which are business and hobby. So I start with personal first, but when it comes to the business, one of the very first frameworks I ever used was pretty simple. And even though I do something maybe a little bit more robust now, I think this is a good starting point for people. And just like you, this was something that I got initially the idea from a guy named David Finkel. And then I adapted it over the years and expanded upon it. And I honestly have even taken some of the things that I've learned from you and how I saw Brooklyn Music Factory doing annual planning. But I'll stop with all the throat clearing and all the table setting and maybe just get into it. So when I think about the year, I have 6 questions that I want to work through, both at the yearly level and then at the quarterly level. So at the yearly level, I'm answering these. And then at the beginning of the quarter, I'm going to ask these same questions and look at those yearly goals and ask myself these 6 questions about those yearly goals. And here's what the 6 questions are. 1, what unacceptable thing must we change? Now at the yearly level, I might write 4, 6, 10 of those. What's going on in the business right now that is just unacceptable? And then when it gets to the quarterly level, I'll actually pick one to work on. Second question, what major decision do I need to make? This could be about hiring a team member. This could be about launching a new product. This could be me looking at the industry in which the business is in, seeing the writing on the wall, seeing a trend, seeing an opportunity, and realizing, that's something that we need to do. I can give examples of these here in just a minute, but I want to just kind of get through them first. Third, I have a stop doing list. This is different than an unacceptable thing we must change. Stop doing is really focused more on an action. Number 4, what relationships do we need to cultivate? That could be hiring someone. That could be something around networking. A lot of times this one is a lot easier to do just because there's only so many relationships you can have or cultivate. So it could look like forming a deeper bond with your teachers in your music school, deeper bond with key staff members, could be hiring for a particular role in your business. So pretty huge. 5, a capacity to develop. This could be a personal capacity as a leader or capacities you could be developing in your team. And then the 6th one is what swing for the fences opportunity should I pursue? And this really, this could be similar to the major decision to make. And sometimes I might only have one for the year that I come up with at the beginning of the year, but then as the year goes along, because of a certain person I meet or an opportunity that comes up, I'm thinking, oh, this is here's this opportunity that if we don't exploit this, I'm going to look back on this in 5 years and think to myself, like, what was I thinking? Why didn't I do that? Now, like I said, this was an early framework that I worked on, or that I worked with. Since that time, there are other frameworks that I've become aware of that are a little more robust. And as I got more comfortable with the planning process and just the commitment to it, I started modifying this, adding things onto it. I started getting more into like kind of looking at, financial data, marketing and metrics data, and started making that a part of my process as well, and extrapolating trends. And there's a point that I'd like to make here. Even if you don't do this very well, it's shocking to me sometimes that I will get to the end of the year. By the way, I consult these planning documents throughout the year. Like, I look at these on a frequent basis to make sure that I'm on track. And it's fascinating to me how I might not get to all the things on the list. I can't tell you the number of times in past years where I might not have even consciously worked on something or put more than a cursory plan in place to make something happen that was on my planning document, and it happened anyway. And I think it's simply because we write it down. I think there's some research that says simply by writing something down, and this is data-backed research, something like 50 to 60% more likely for that thing to happen simply by writing it down one time. I don't know what the data is on writing it down and then looking at that weekly and thinking about it and consciously processing, like, oh, how can I get to that thing? I don't know if that isn't motivation to just, go through the personal framework and then maybe this business framework and just think out, oh, well, here's what I'd like to change. Because I think it moves it from just being a vague wish, like, oh man, I wish parents wouldn't fight me on our makeup policy as much, or, oh man, I wish I had, a really, really good teacher in our guitar department, because right now the one that we have is only so, but I really wish. That's wishful thinking. When you write it down and actually even put a cursory plan in place, well, how could I actually do this? That's when it becomes real.
Yes. Okay, I got some questions for you, Daniel.
Okay. Oh, I love it.
A bunch. But I want to dive in here because I think that process is great. And I have a few comments, but more importantly, I have questions.
Okay.
I'd love to hear I love number 4. Especially, okay. I just wrote a big heart by number 4, relationships to cultivate, because I think this ties into one of our central themes here in the podcast, which is how to develop teams. Okay. And when we think about teams, oftentimes it feels sort of weird. It's like developing teams and an org chart and blah, blah, blah. But you put it so beautifully where you're like relationships to cultivate. One of the key responsibilities that we have as CEO at our school is in developing lasting relationships with our teachers and our staff, and having these consistent one-on-one check-ins, which you framed much nicer, which is like cultivating a relationship. So can you tell me a little bit about the genesis of that, and like where have you found that to be? Maybe where did you lack interest in cultivating relationships at some point in your career? And then when did you realize that was so important that you put it on one of your annual plan?
Sure. So first off, what's interesting about you pointing out number 4 is it's the one that when I'm going through the process, both yearly and quarterly, it's probably the one that I spend the least amount of time on. That doesn't say anything about its importance. It's just that sometimes the things in that category don't require much thought or creativity because there's only so many relationships that I have when it comes to the business. Right. So so that's part 1. Part 2, because you asked what was the genesis of this? Well, it was foisted upon me because since I took this other person's framework and tried it on for myself, like trying on my dad's shoes, when I was a little kid. At first it's a little awkward and then you grow into them, right? Yeah. So by taking that on, it actually presented it to me as a category that I should even think about or pay attention to. So simply the fact that I obeyed the framework or submitted to the framework, it made me think about it. That's the second thing I'd say. Third thing is that the action items I put in there, or what I write down as a result of that category, submitting to that category, is usually one of two things. It makes me think about, who do I need to expand upon the mission of what we're doing here? Or if there's no need to expand, what can I be doing? What can I be putting in place to enhance, improve, build into the current relationships I have? And again, there's only so many things one can do to develop your staff. There's only so many things you can do to network with a potential business partner, those sorts of things. But I think the overall takeaway here is that simply by that being there, it has forced me to think about those things. And in a way, since I have tended to be a lone wolf throughout my entire life, it's forced me to grow a little bit. And then maybe to answer the final part of your question, which we might have touched on in a previous episode, I've had business partners throughout the years in various ventures, but for the first part of my career, my ideal was just to be alone. And then at a certain point, when I wanted to grow a bigger business, not only here but in some of the other things that I do that are apart from this, it became evident to me that I needed to bring people on to help me realize that goal. And so it was less of a, how do I hire this person, and more like, oh, I'm working way too much, and there's a real need here for me to at first it was to offload this work, but later the vision grew to, well, how can this person actually contribute their own thoughts and creativity to this mission and actually improve upon even the best idea I had? And that's happened many, many times where
I'm going to jump in here because you're touching on such an important point, and we hear this so often. We hear this with many of the music school owners we work with. We hear questions coming in around this, which is, hey, isn't there like a silver bullet hire I can do that will take care of all my administrative pains? Or isn't there someone I can just hire that will just handle all the marketing from here on out? And you and I are always like, well, let's talk about the process for improving your hiring funnel. Let's talk about how to bring in the best possible candidates, et cetera. But you're touching on such an important point. That's step one. And you need to ask yourself how you're going to cultivate that relationship.
Interesting.
For years to come, because you said, and you're really, I just think it's super valuable to say this out loud. There is only so much we can do, right? Around, helping our team members, et cetera. And I want to get to your capacity to develop, because I think that's directly linked to number 4 around relationships to cultivate. But one thing we can do is commit to showing up to these people, and another thing we can do is commit to stopping with this idea that we have a bunch of employees that work for me or work for us, right? And instead realize that we're all on a journey together. We're cultivating relationships with other people, teachers, staff, that we hope will be here for years to come to try and realize something that's far greater than what we would have done, Daniel, as you pointed out a minute ago, when you were alone in your office by yourself, thinking that was the limit to the scope of what you could imagine. So it's like we're imagining something greater. That gets back to our 1, 3, 5 year go big or go home imagination project in my personal writing. And then we're saying professionally, we know we ain't doing it alone.
Yeah. And so already this particular episode is recommending to people that you commit to some sort of at least annual review process. My recommendation, as you get more sophisticated, this would be quarterly. And then what I do, which is weekly, I will spend 2 hours a week just planning my upcoming week. It's how I'm handling all the stuff that I have to handle. It requires that level of planning, but then everything goes really, really smoothly. So there's obviously that takeaway. But if you wanted like a leverageable tactic that you can very, very easily implement that takes no thought. You won't have to read a book. And that I get these shocked looks from people when I tell them to do this. Just set up a weekly meeting with key team members. Have a running shared Google Doc agenda where you can write down all the issues that came up for the week and literally just commit to showing up to them same day, same time, every single week. It's expected. And you just meet with that person. This will do more to develop those relationships and create capacities that you had no idea that your team could handle, than any kind of super long management textbook that you could read and learn all the stuff.
Yeah.
That just have the meeting. You will communicate values. You will communicate care and respect of that person. You will communicate the vision of the company. And eventually you're going to have someone who is excited to work for you, who's excited, but more importantly, excited to work for the company and the customers of the company, and actually go to bat for the company and can even call you out, which one of my key team members has no qualms doing. And sometimes we even butt heads a little bit, like we did yesterday in our Slack channel, because they're taking ownership over the particular project. And if you're doing your job well, and I don't know, I'm going a little bit off topic here, but if you're doing your job well, when you see that kind of ownership, you don't fight back and be like, no, we're going to do it my way. Unless they're going to really harm the company, you step back and be like, oh, I love this. This is great. Keep doing more of that. Let me give you a few tips, but keep doing that. So there's your easy 80-20 hack. If you leave this episode with nothing else, just set up that weekly meeting with those key team members. Huge.
Okay, and so let me give them a very specific, simple format for that meeting. What are 2 things that are going well this week? What are 2 things you could use help with? And then end the meeting by saying, so, here's what I've heard. Is there any other way that I can help you in the next 7 days? That's it. That's your whole format. It's 30 minutes. Set a timer. Don't run over 30. Doesn't matter. You'll see them again next week.
So, Nate, as we head into perhaps the close of the episode, which I've noticed from the past that I usually say that and we still talk for like 20 more minutes. But as we head into the close here, let's make this super practical for everyone. How does someone take this document that they've taken the time to write out and actually make it a reality as they go throughout the year? Do you have any hacks, tips, tricks? Sometimes I resist those words because it makes it feel like it's going to be easy when it really is just showing up and doing the work. But do you have any ideas about how to make this a reality? I certainly do, but maybe you can share a few things first.
Okay, so yeah, great question. First of all, if anybody listening is like me, there's like if I make a couple of simple choices at the outset, invest a little bit of money, and sort of set the table as it were, I'm more likely to do it. So here's tip number 1. Just buy yourself a really nice moleskin notebook or something that you can dedicate to this work. Okay? So you can write your personal planning in this. You can then go through your business planning in this using Daniel's framework, which is great. And then you can put it up on your shelf and say, this is the one book I'm going to pull down to read and reread to see where my brain was when I set aside the time to do that thinking. Okay? So I buy one of these suckers. I buy myself a really nice pen because I like to write. But whatever your platform is, commit to it. Okay? Secondly, the obvious thing which we've already stated is what you schedule is what matters. So if you've listened to this episode and you've been like, man, I totally want to do that. I want to start now. Then open up your friggin' calendar and decide find some 3-hour blocks where you're going to sit down and do it. And do not worry about getting it right. Don't worry if you've written like a, novella. Just set aside the time. Make sure that nobody can bother you. Let your family and friends know you're not available. Turn this thing off. Your phone should absolutely be off. Internet should be nowhere near, and you should just do the work. Okay? Now, next thing I'll say is, last tip, is that, Daniel, you alluded to the fact that what you write down is far more likely to get your attention. So I would take it a step further too, which is what you write down that is visible to you regularly is far more likely to get your attention. So you and I did this. Remember when we came out of our first quarterly planning session, however many months ago, early last year, early in 2021, I went into Canva, which we use all the time at Brooklyn Music Factory, and I created a little one sheet. Hey, this is what Daniel and Nate said we were going to accomplish by the end of Q4 in 21. And you'll notice in our meetings, like in that weekly meeting, I'll try to remember to be like, hey guys, let's look at it. Remember what we said we would do in October? Are we still doing that? So basically, once you come up with some of the items on your things that must change or major decisions you're making, put it in writing somewhere that you'll look at. You don't have to go into Canva and make a fancy thing, though they have planning templates. So if you subscribe to something like Canva, then you just open up a planning template and write in like the three decisions you've made and print it out. But I also just write on notes. I just stick notes up on the monitor. And I'm like, dude, don't forget this. You said duh. So those are the three tips. Get yourself, set the table with something that's inviting for you that you like. Nice pen, nice notebook is the way Nate operates. Book the time to do the work. Don't try to, if finding a day is too difficult, just find 2 or 3 3-hour blocks over the next 2 weeks. By the way, it doesn't matter when you're listening to this. I did a ton of writing in July of this year. Just to try to really go deeper, right? And then finally, try to put it in some sort of visual printed version or some version that's analog that you can look at regularly yourself, and then also be willing to share with team members.
I'm loving what I'm hearing you say there. There's a few thoughts that I had in reaction to what you said there. First off, the things you mentioned, I wholeheartedly agree with. So I'm not going to double what you said simply by repeating some of the things, but kind of my take on it. Other than to say a very brief quote. Heard this on a Tim Ferriss podcast about 5 years ago, wrote it down, have kept this top of mind. What's talked about is a dream. What's envisioned is exciting. What is planned becomes possible, but only what is scheduled becomes real. And I think the greatest tip that I have is to not think of annual planning or annual goals as annual. What has made these things become real for me, just in looking back at what I wrote down at the beginning of 2020 and looking at all the things that came true, in some cases, like I said earlier, things that I wrote down, wasn't even quite sure how I was going to get to them, but just had them as a realistic goal based on what I thought was possible, and then they ended up becoming real, is that there needs to be regular check-ins with this. I think your version of that is, you made the one sheet, you made the graphic that you're constantly bringing up to your team or reminding you of yourself. For me, it is a weekly rhythm of sitting down, and I have a folder in my Evernote where I have those planning documents and what I want to have happen for the year and what's important to me, and a weekly reminder where I just go through that, and then I make out my plan for the week. And a lot of times it's based on what, like literally at the end of December, I made my marketing calendar for the entire year, the master marketing calendar, not the individual episodes of this podcast that we're going to do, or, we're going to have exactly 28 emails for this launch, like not that deep, but just here's what the shape of the year is going to look like for marketing. Here's what it's going to look like for our product launches, that sort of thing. And then as I sit down weekly and look at what I had planned for the year, it makes obvious what I need to be doing. The other thing is just showing up and doing the work, which isn't really an annual planning thing, but I do get the sense there is a certain type of personality out there, and I think we can default into this, of saying, hey, I want that thing, and putting a token effort towards it, and then thinking, oh, now it has to happen because I did that.
Hmm.
It's just not how it works.